Today I'm going to re-veneer and clean up this old Pioneer SX550. All we're going to be using is a heat gun, some maple edge banding wood veneer, a roller for our glue, some Titebond wood glue, a laminate roller to roll the veneer down, and some maple veneer. Before we get started though, cable management. Cable management. This receiver is special to me because it's one of the few pieces I have left from when I got into stereos back in high school. For a while, it lived in my parents' living room, powering a set of realistic Minimus 7 speakers. After the new veneer, it'll be spending some time in my own living room setup. Feels good to bring it home. The SX550 was introduced in 1977 and sold for $250, which is around $1,300 in today's money. It produces a modest 20 watts per channel, but it's more than enough power for my taste, and I really love the way it looks. Now, let's make it look even better. I needed to start by removing the old vinyl veneer, which was pretty easy, but there was a brown beige rubber underneath it that was kind of a pain to get off, but I needed to apply this new veneer to a solid wood surface. And so I started just by applying the edge banding. You can see I just measured it, cut it, and then used an iron to apply it on there, and then a roller to roll it down and make sure the glue stuck. I know there are lots of fancy tools for cutting edge banding and whatnot, and even just veneer, but I've just been using this X-Acto knife to trim up the veneer pieces to the size that I needed, and then I'm just gonna use sandpaper to sand down and kind of roll over the edges. Since this is paper-backed veneer, I just have to make sure that the wood actually covers the paper part that's underneath it on all the seams, which can be kind of tricky. But because of the top case of this receiver being metal, I decided to go for the paper-backed veneer just because it'll bend around the corners of the metal top case a little bit better than, without falling apart, than a non-paper-backed veneer. So the process I'm using to install this veneer on the particle board pieces for the side of this receiver is just putting a couple layers of Titebond onto the wood. So you just apply a first layer and then you let that almost dry, and then you apply a second layer both to the veneer and to whatever surface you're putting it on. Just let them dry so they're barely tacky at all, and then you just set the veneer onto the surface, and then you just use an iron to heat up the veneer and get that glue to bond with itself. So I just used the drill and a drill bit to bang out little kind of pinpoints in the one side of veneer I've already put on through the screw holes. And then I marked the third hole, as you can see on the top left there of this panel, with masking tape so that I could easily drill it out and not worry about damaging the veneer. I really liked this double glue method. It allows you to cut out your veneer and then position it over the top of the piece you're applying it to and kind of get it in the right spot before you actually adhere it. Gives you a lot of flexibility with installing the veneer. There are two holes on the exterior side of each panel where the mounting screws sit. To enlarge them, I started by rough cutting the veneer with a razor knife. Then I moved over to a drill press to clean up the holes. And I started with a smaller bit to center the hole, then used the full-size bit to mount the veneer with the existing hole. When it came time to finish the seams on the veneer, I just used 150 grit sandpaper on a soft block and just pulled it the direction of whatever layer was overlapping the layer next to it, so that it kind of pulled the wood over the paper backing and ended up with some really nice seams. It's just always a good reminder to cut your veneer a little larger than you think so that the layers overlap each other. This will give you much better seams. I thought that doing 6 sides of veneer on each side panel was a pain, but it was nothing compared to getting the vinyl off of the top metal cover. I tried cutting and pulling, using an orbital sander and even a wood chisel, which actually ended up working pretty well. After struggling with it, I decided to remove the vinyl around the vent slits, then just prepped it to apply veneer. I'd never bent veneer around curved corners or applied it to metal before, so I'd been forming a plan in my head which consisted of applying the adhesive to the whole piece, then ironing it to the top of the metal. I would then use steam and the iron to bend each side down and activate the adhesive. This plan worked great for the top and the back edge, but started to fall apart when I moved on to the sides. Either the adhesive became ineffective due to the steam, or because of the time it took to bend each side, the glue had dried out beyond usefulness. Either way, it was no longer working to hold the veneer, and unfortunately I ended up having to remove the whole piece of veneer and start over. Off camera, I figured out that using a wider wood chisel worked well for removing the vinyl, and was able to get the piece down to bare metal using 80 grit sandpaper, which should hold the adhesive better than the smooth vinyl. I also steamed and bent the new piece of veneer before applying adhesive to it. Then I put my 2 coats of adhesive on there, ironed it on the top, ironed it on the sides, and I used clamps on the corners to just keep them from kind of lifting at the corners as you're bending it, because it wasn't fully bent from the steaming. So I used lots of clamps, lots of little wood blocks to protect the veneer and just to make sure that those bends stayed. I even got this front edge sanded and trimmed down so that it was thin enough to fit into the notch on the back side of the faceplate, just like the vinyl veneered one did. I used a little Rubio Monocoat Pure to make the maple veneer look awesome, and then put it back together just to see how it would look inside our house. Cutting out all the vent slots on the top case of the receiver had been looming over my head, and when it finally came time to do it, I wasn't sure how I was going to get them to look sharp and straight. I tried a few different methods and ended up finding that using a fine-tipped razor knife to cut them out from the backside worked pretty well. Once they were cut out, I used a set of thin jewelry files to round out the end of each vent and give a nice straight edge to each side. It didn't turn out perfectly, but the original vinyl wasn't perfect either. It just stands out more with the lighter veneer, so I put more effort in. All of the cutting and filing did cause some of the thin parts of veneer between each vent to lift up, but that was easily remedied with the iron and some clamps. After letting it sit for 24 hours, I removed the clamps and brought it home. As I assembled it, I got more and more happy with how it turned out. The light wood works so well with the silver face and the warm lights. So the veneering is done, and I'm pretty pleased with the way that it turned out. I like the light wood look. It matches all the other wood in our house. If you want to see more content like this and see me veneer other things, feel free to subscribe. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I'd love to help you in your process of woodworking and working on stereos. Have a good one.